before you ship that stuff out. The minute there's an economic downturn, the government says, okay, you can cut as many trees as you want and ship them out of the we need the revenue that comes in for those logs. You know, doesn't matter that they're above the sustainable level. Just start cutting and ship them out. Or we say to the fishermen, yeah, I know there are limits that are a sustainable level, but we've got problems now. You can catch more this year. Or we say to the chemical companies, well, I know it's expensive having all this anti-pollution stuff, so you can pollute more. We always ask nature to pay the price for our economic problems. An economy is made possible by the biosphere. The economy doesn't produce anything from nothing. The economy has to use the raw materials that come out of the air, the water, and the land. It's the biosphere that allows us to make a living. And we use the biosphere to dilute away all of our toxic effluents. Yet the economic system ignores or discounts the things that nature in the biosphere does to keep it healthy and abundant for an animal like us. Nature is constantly doing things that allow us to survive and stay alive. Now, I'll explain what I mean in a minute. I once had a confrontation with I met the CEO of a big forest company that we were having a battle with his forest. And finally, it became very heated, and in frustration, he finally said to me, "Listen, Suzuki, are tree huggers like you willing to pay money to protect those trees? Because if you're not willing to pay the money, they don't have any value till someone cuts them down." And that was my epiphany. That's when I realized, oh my God, he's absolutely right. We have got a screwed up economic system. You see, as long as that forest is intact, all of the green things in it are taking carbon dioxide out of the air, putting oxygen back in it. Not a bad service for an animal like us. If there weren't all these things photosynthesizing, we would not be here. And yet economists are so bright that they regard that service of nature as an externality. What that means is it ain't in the economic equation. And when I first heard that, I said, what planet is this economy for? It's certainly not the planet I live on, because those things are performing unbelievably important services for us animals. And it should be included in some way. But that's why every time someone says we need a carbon tax, the screaming that goes on, how dare you talk about a carbon tax? Look at the last election. Mr. Dion ran on a carbon tax, and our Prime Minister's response to what every economist would agree is a powerful tool to reduce emissions, the carbon tax. Mr. Harper's response to that was, that's crazy, and that's all he said about the possibility of a carbon tax, and the press allowed him to get away with that. We don't want to put a price on carbon. That's an externality. That forest, as long as it's standing, is pumping millions of gallons of water out of the soil, transpiring it into the air and modulating weather and climate. An externality. The forest is holding the soil, so when it rains, it doesn't run into the salmon spawning gravels and spoil the spawning beds. Externality. All of the pollinators in that forest are pollinating the flowering plants and keeping that web of living things healthy and abundant. That's an externality. So all the many things that ecosystems do to keep the planet habitable for an animal like us, economists dismiss as irrelevant or an externality. It's no wonder Hazel Henderson said, conventional economics is a form of brain damage. Absolutely, it doesn't make any sense at all. And then we compound the problem by enshrining growth as the very definition of progress. Ask any politician, any business person, how well they did last year. And within a picosecond, they'll talk about growth. Growth in in GDP, in the economy, in market share, profit, jobs. Growth has become the definition of progress. And nobody wants to impede progress. We all want progress. But if growth is the definition of progress, we don't ask the important questions like, what is an economy for? Are there no limits? How much is enough? Are we happier with all this stuff? We don't ask those questions. It's just, we got to keep the economy growing. I mean, you hear it all the time. Economy, if it's below 3% a year, oh my God, we're in real difficulty. And if there's no growth in the GDP, oh my God, are we in terrible trouble. First of all, the GDP is one of the dumbest measurements or indicators of the economy because it only adds. Anyway, I could go off on a whole other speech on that. But the GDP is one of the dumbest factors that we use to indicate how well we are doing. And yet it's used by everyone as the main indicator. If you think about it, what does growth by itself, what does growth do for any one of us? It doesn't do a bloody thing. Growth is just the description of a system. Growth by itself is useless to any one of us. You got to ask, what are you growing for? What is the end to which we're going? But no, we've come to say growth, growth, growth. That's all we want is growth, growth, growth in profit, growth in... This is absolutely nuts. You know why? Nothing can grow forever in a finite world. The only two things that think they can grow forever in a finite world are cancers and economists. And the end result is the same. We live within the biosphere, the zone of air, water, and land where 30 million species live. It's very, very thin. Carl Sagan, the late astronomer, told us, if you shrink the Earth to the size of a basketball, the biosphere, where all 30 million species live, would be thinner than a layer of varnish that you paint onto it. And that's it. It's fixed. It can't grow. Nothing within the finite world can grow forever. I'm going to show you why what we keep talking about, growth, 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 is suicide. Anything growing steadily over time is called exponential growth. And anything growing exponentially has a predictable doubling time. Okay? So whether it's the amount of garbage you make or the amount of land in your city or the number of people in your province, anything growing steadily will have a predictable doubling time. So if it's growing at 1% a year, it'll double in 70 years. 2% a year, it'll double in 35 years. 3% in 24 years. 4% in 17 and a half years. Anything growing steadily will double predictably. I'm going to give you a system analogous to the planet. It's a test tube full of food for bacteria. That's the planet, okay? And I'm going to put one bacterial cell in, and that's us. And it's going to go into exponential growth. It's going to divide every minute. So at time 0, right at the beginning, there's one cell. 1 minute later, there are 2. 2 minutes later, 4. 3 minutes, 8. 4 minutes, 16. That's exponential growth. And at 60 minutes, the test tube is completely packed with bacteria, and there's no food left. So it's a 60-minute growth cycle. When is the test tube only half full? And of course, the answer is at 59 minutes. 59 minutes, it's only half full, but 1 minute later, it'll be completely full, right? So at 58 minutes, it's 25% full. 57 minutes, it's 12.5% full. At 55 minutes of a 60-minute cycle, it's 3% full. So if at 55 minutes, one of the bacteria says, hey guys, I've been thinking, we got a population problem. The other bacteria would say, Jack, what the hell have you been smoking, man? 97% of the test tube's empty. We've been around for 55 minutes. And they'd be 5 minutes away from filling it. So they're no smarter than people. At 59 minutes, they go, oh my God, Jack was right. We got 1 minute left. What the hell are we going to do now? Don't give any money to those economists. Give it to those scientists. And by God, in less than a minute, those bacterial scientists invent 3 new test tubes full of food. So they quadruple the amount of food and space. So they're saved, right? That would be like us discovering 3 more planet Earths right nearby that we could start moving to right away. So what happens? Well, at 60 minutes, the first test tube's full. 61 minutes, the second test tube's full. At 62 minutes, all 4 are full. By quadrupling the amount of food and space, you buy 2 extra minutes. How do we add even a fraction more of 1% more of air, water, soil, or biodiversity? You can't. It's fixed. It's finite. It can't grow. And every scientist I've talked to agrees with me. We are already past the 59th minute. So all of the talk about we got to have more, we got to keep growing, is saying we've got to accelerate what is a suicidal path. Now, when I say this, and there are politicians and business people in the audience, they get mightily pissed off at me. How dare you say we're past the 59th minute? Look at our stores. They're filled with stuff. Look at our people. We're living longer. We're healthier. How dare you say we're past the 59th minute? I say it without apology. We have created the illusion that everything's fine by using up the rightful legacy of our children and their grandchildren. You don't have to believe me. Talk to any elder that's lived in Moncton for 80 or 90 years and ask them, what was it like when you were 4 or 5? I've been privileged to go to the heart of the Amazon, to the Serengeti, to Australia, to the Arctic. And everywhere I go to a village and I try to find the oldest person around. And I say, what was it like here when you were a kid? And everywhere, even in the Serengeti, even in the Amazon, the answer is chillingly similar. It used to be so different. There used to be trees as far as you could see. The air used to be crystal clear. The rivers used to be jammed with fish. The sky used to be black with birds at certain times of the year. All over the world, our elders are a living record of enormous changes that have happened in the span of a single human life. North Americans often say, well, there's plenty more where that came from. You know there isn't plenty more where that came from. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Earth has been fully occupied and fully developed by 30 million species. If we drive a plant or animal out of existence where we live, they can't find an empty place to go and move and live. If they're not here, they're not anywhere. Well, Americans like to say, well, that's the price of progress. I don't think it's progress to use up the rightful legacy of our children and our grandchildren. This is what we've done, all in the name of progress or growth in the economy. We know that something is wrong. When I left for Australia 6 weeks ago, it was announced that 20% of all plant species in the world could be extinct by the middle of this century. I land in Sydney, Australia, and all the headlines were, Australian dollar has reached parity with the American dollar. Yoo-hoo! Isn't that great? And the announcement about 20% of all plant species was buried on page 18 or something of their national papers. We heard 2 weeks ago from the COP10 meetings in Nagoya that 20% of all vertebrates could be gone by the middle of this century. Was that headline news in our newspapers? Not at all. And you've been hearing it over and over again, the crisis in biodiversity. We know in our guts that something's wrong, but we don't like to face it up. The oceans cover 70% of the planet. They're a mess. We've used them as a garbage can. There are islands of plastic in the Pacific Ocean bigger than the state of Texas. We know that there are dead zones where nothing can live, growing in size, number, and duration in every ocean on the planet. We know that excess carbon in the atmosphere is dissolving as carbonic acid and acidifying the ocean. And we heard Boris Worm at Dalhousie announce a few years ago, at the rate we're going by 2050, there will not be a single commercially useful species of fish left in the ocean. 80% of the forests of the land have been entered, have been fragmented or destroyed. There are only 4 large, pristine forests left on the planet. The largest is in Canada, the Boreal, the Amazon in Brazil, the Congo, and in Papua New Guinea.